Da-di-da-di-da-da-di-da. Da-di-da-di-da-da-di-da. What do you hear over the air? CQ serenade. So you don't know just what it means. Dust your shoes off, shake out your jeans. Get on your feet, jump to the beat of CQ serenade. CQ has gone and brought us a new rhythm that's swinging all the cats by the ear. Let's do ourselves a favor and get with 'em. You'll find you get the message, man, you'll hear it coming loud and clear. Doesn't matter.
We'll talk to you a little bit tonight about some Collins equipment that I've collected over the years. This is going to be interesting because I've actually had 3 different Gold Dust Twin sets. Never more than one at a time though. I never was smart enough to keep them. Although I'd really sacrifice the program if somebody would step up here and show me how we take 4 individual monitors and get it and end up with one. That to me is more technologically interesting than the Collins
You have to have a government contract. Big fat one.
Okay, that'll do it. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about what is truly an American classic if you're a ham. That's the Collins Gold Dust Twins. That's the last really newly designed big equipment. Everything later went to smaller equipment that we use today. So just a little bit about myself. I was licensed in '64. I've been collecting vintage gear and restoring it since that time. Use modern technology as well. I used to be in purchasing, global purchasing. I'm a member of a bunch of organizations there. I'm also into model railroading and amateur astronomy, not to the extent that I'm in collecting ham radios though. With me tonight are 2 people I'd like you to know. One is Gary Drash. Gary's in ham radio. He's an entrepreneur. He's been in management, field sales, he's retired now. He's past president of the Ozaki Radio Club, which I'm also a member of. And he's also an author of a book, maybe some of you have seen, called Ham Radio is Alive and Well, Traditional Ham Radio. So anything you want to say there, Gary?
Well, I wrote this book, or I published it, I should say, in November of this past year. I got started in ham radio in 1960 when I was 12 years old. I wound up disappearing into family and everything else, and I actually thought the hobby went dead. I thought it died due to technology. And when I retired in 2009, I was fly fishing with a friend who's a ham, W9R, and he started talking about DX and QSLing and all this stuff, and I said, really, they're still doing it? And he said, yeah. And I came back in, and I was just amazed at what happened, and that's what I'm writing about. It's of what I discovered from 1960 to 2009, the differences and how the hobby's actually growing. So I have copies with me if anyone's interested.
Not to mention good pictures
Thank
of some
you.
of my vintage gear.
Yeah, I do have some of the stuff in there.
On the other end of the spectrum, Gary was licensed in '60, I was licensed in '64. We have Tony with us. Tony and I are both in the Wisconsin Amateur Radio Club. And Tony's been licensed since 2015?
3 years.
3 years, okay. But Tony's also an entrepreneur, also in ham radio, has been in management, and is an engineer. And in spite of that, Gary and I do accept him as a friend. But anyway, just so you know all that stuff. All right. Well, I want to show you a row of vintage gear. There's the Collins KWS-1 on the left. There is the old Bell & Howell speaker. I'll tell you later why there's not a Collins speaker there. There's an Static D104, an old one, not one of the ones made later on in the CB craze. There's the Collins 75A4 and their W9MXQ, all vintage gear. So why do we do this, huh? We collect old gear. Here's a picture of WB2 AEW's shack. You see that really nice old Collins KW1, which preceded the KWS1, by the way. And there's this little kid. Look at him. Look at that look on his face with that nice D104 microphone. That's one of the reasons we do all this. And I think Collins collectors in particular, I'm not uniquely a Collins collector. I collect about anything that I think is interesting. But the Collins collectors are really into passing the torch, so to speak. Well, here this young man is ready to roll. Okay, here's the Gold Dust Twins. On the left you can see a picture. It's a little hard to get them from the same spot, but the picture obviously is better on the left of just the receiver. The receiver weighs about 35 pounds. The transmitter RF unit weighs about 50 pounds, and those two match each other cabinet for cabinet. You saw in the previous picture there, where I had the two up there next to me, you see that's what they really look like next to each other. You typically don't, I guess you don't have to have the transmitter sitting on top of the power unit. The power unit weighs 173 pounds, so what do we got here? 225, about 270 pounds, something like that. I had these moved one time. It's always interesting to watch people that deal with moving furniture and stuff like that. The guy wrapped these in this saran wrap type wrap that you put on crates and pallets, and he, with the helper, he put him on his back and walked up the steps with him. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got my first set, and I say you've got to be under 30 to do what he did. Okay, this is the way my Gold Dust twins look now. When I first got them and got them on the air, the picture over there, I guess this doesn't really, the pointer doesn't show real well. On the left side up there is the picture from early in 2016 when I got them working. And you see there you've got the transmitter, in that case on top of the power supply. There is the receiver behind the microphone, that's a 10DA mic. And then I've got an old ICO key, I don't know how many of you are familiar that collect older equipment. That's the one thing ICO made when they made sideband transceivers that actually worked. And then on the right is the last time I used it for a QSO was late in the winter of 2017, I'm sorry about that. Late in the winter is the last time I really had them on for a long time. Same radios, I used a D104 instead of the 10DA microphone at that time. The D104 actually sounds a little bit better with the radios. So my history with the collection, the first one I acquired in about 1976. Now, here's the deal. I got these out of a dumpster. I'll show you proportionally how the dumpster looked compared to the car I had. I got a call from a friend of mine, W7EDT, Dell. Dell's been a silent key for a lot of years. Dell owned a construction company in central Illinois. And he called up and said, Bill, if you'd like to have a pair of Collins Gold Dust twins, a set, you need to go to my construction site, gave me the address, and you need to pick them out of the dumpster. My guys won't bother you. In fact, if you need some help, ask them. Well, they weren't any help at all. But anyway, it came with a lot of other stuff. In reality, there was a KWS-1 transmitter, 375A4 receivers. So I wrestled all that stuff out of a dumpster. You can imagine what that looks like. Now, the dumpster was only about this high. It wasn't one of those ones you can't even see over the top of, thank goodness. I'll tell you what, I swear I would have gotten it out of there even if I had it been. But KWS-1 RF unit, KWS-1 power supply unit, 75A4, 3 receivers, a crate. One way to easily carry the transmitter is to take the power transformer, which is probably about 50 pounds, out of the thing. And also, the Collins calls it the reactor, it's the choke. You get that out of there and it's kind of manageable. Well, they were in a crate. And then lots and lots of service parts, boxes and boxes of service parts. And other brand radios. I won't even get into that tonight. That's another presentation down there. So out of the dumpster and down to the ground and into my small station wagon. And I'm telling you, there's no way I could do that today. There was the station wagon. Mine was silver, but it had that good side look. 2-door station wagon, a Mercury Bobcat. You remember those? Same as the Pinto, all right? And that dumpster was those dimensions. And I got it out of there by taking scrap lumber that was in the dumpster. I slid the units up the side, had other wood on the other side. Now, I don't remember anymore how I was good enough to get that thing tipped over, because there's kind of a bad moment there, right? Well, I got them out of there. Even the receivers were difficult to get out, but that transmitter was a job. Thank goodness there was 3 receivers and 1 transmitter. I allowed the ham that identified the find. This was really his request from the commission. He wanted one of the 75A4s. So I delivered that to him on the way home. The 2 remaining 75A4s were in excellent condition, no problem. They were simple to bring back to life. But remember, this is 1976. They were only about 15 years old. If you go to a ham fest and pick up a 15-year-old radio, you probably should bring it up slowly, but you might take the risk of running it. Probably nothing wrong with it. But I did run them up, but they were in good shape. But one thing you should remember, we think of that, I picked up, Dave, you're a boat anchor collector, okay? So we think of this stuff as being classics, right? I've got a friend of mine that made the statement, those old manufacturers made radios, not classics. So a guy on the assembly line, or a gal, back in 1957, building a 75A4, had no conception that we're going to be out here in 2018 running those radios, trying to get them to work. They were going to have another model by then. They figured they'd be thrown away. Well, they were wrong. None of that stuff got thrown away, or very little of it. This was as said by a friend of mine, Bob Bailey, down in the corner, W9DYQ, a friend since childhood. He said this in relation to his 1946 vintage Globe GC-18 or GC-1B Swift aircraft. Any of you familiar with that? I'm not an aircraft guy. The Swift is quite a plane, I understand. It's collectible to him, okay? So he made that comment that Swifts are hard to keep flying today because the people that built them in 1946, they didn't think we'd be using them in 2018. Well, there's Bob flying this plane. Bob and his wife Deb, also a ham, KA0PBV, she was flying in another plane they own, a Cessna R172K, up in formation with Bob and took his picture. Now, I want to make another comment here. You see I have the note that Bob is using a Shadid device. Those of you that know me know that people have made the comment that I don't operate much CW, and what I use to talk on, one of them here, is called a Shadid device. So Bob coined that phrase. So if you talk to Gary, Gary will make a comment, well, you were in the contest, Bill, I suppose you were using the Shadid device. But I caught Bob here, he's on his headphones here. And also I have a picture of Bob in the Wisconsin QSO party working me on phone. Okay, so the saga continued and continues now. The 75A4 gifted to that fellow. Remember I told you he took one. Turned out to have a burned out power transformer. Guess what was in that box of parts? I assumed that the former owner never found out who he was. I assumed that he had bought that transformer to replace in that receiver. That owner now, as I said, is a silent key, but the radio remains a prized possession of another friend, a mutual friend of he and I, lives in Bloomington, Illinois, is a collector of Collins. If you've been in, he actually has a room in his house, not very much smaller than this room, divided into two parts.
Talking about Massa?
Pardon?
Massa?
No, not Massa, I do know him. No, this guy lives in Bloomington, very private guy.
That's right, Massa's in Normal.
Right, that's right, and that's actually where I'm from. So I intend to visit Massa. I met him on the vintage sideband net.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm going to visit Massa next time we're down there. My dad still lives there.
Did you see the pictures that, it was 3 years ago, he had went to Japan and he had brought back all kinds of crap, him and his wife.
Oh, I have to see that then. Yep, he seems like a really nice guy.
If you go to a QR page, I think he's got a bunch of this.
He does have quite a few pictures on there, that's correct. Well, so this is now paired with this other guy's Collins KW1. I would tell you who he is, but he's an extremely private individual. You used to be able to find his call in two places on a registry kept of the KW1 translator. Was it 156 or 153? And he's on there. He used to have two, and I don't remember who bought one of them. But he still uses it today with a 75A4 with the KW1. Nice pair. The KWS-1 was not so easy as the 75A4 to get on the air. I did replace several RF capacitors. Now, remember, I'm not an electrical engineer. Anything I've learned about fixing ham radios, I've had to teach myself. I do borrow knowledge from friends, asking for their advice, things like that. But these RF capacitors were problems in the tank circuit. Could have meant the thing wasn't properly loaded. Over time, I believe there's a lot of things in the KWS-1 that weren't properly loaded. The blower fan assembly, which this radio has 4X150s the way it originally came, or 4X250B finals. Those tubes need to be cooled when they're idling. Even if you're on standby, no real current in the plate. You have to cool those tubes. For whatever the reason, the fan assembly was there and it was running, but the squirrel cage was gone. I have no idea where it was. And I bought that from a guy that many of us still know, is Miles Cundy, who was the service manager at AES. Yep. He also got me an original Collins air hose. If you know about the KWS-1, you know that there's a big fan in the base, and that blows up into the RF unit and blows through the finals. Excuse me, this is an allergy time of year, so if I start to cough, I'll just take a drink of Coke here, or Pepsi. So I replaced the tubes, I resoldered many connections. I found a lot of solder joint problems in there. This later came back to plague me even more in later units. But actually, most of the stuff in there was frustrating, not really a major problem. The radios worked once I made sure the plate capacitors were fine, and most of that is oil capacitors, not much of a problem in there, but there's a few electrolytics in the KWS-1. Okay, let's see, the first Q, so this is kind of important. In one of the series of articles I'm going to send you, there's a lot of this material is in an article I wrote about the Gold Dust twins. I'm going to kind of go ahead of myself here. Apparently, if you operate CW on a KWS-1, there's a slight whoop to the signal when you send it. There's something with the power supply that isn't conducive to really good keying. Now, if you have to know what to listen for. But one night when I got the thing done, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I finally got the thing working. Any of you been through that? It's like, I'm not going to give up. I'm so close, I'm going to make sure it works. So that night I was on there, I was sending da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da, and then I'd send my call. And this guy, as close as I come on CW here, it wasn't quite this way, but a New Zealand station came back, 15 meters, 2 o'clock in the morning, even on a high sunspot cycle, that's a class act. Okay, he comes back and he says, W9MXQ, my call then, where did you get that KWS-1? It sure sounds nice. And I said something to that effect. All right, well, I went to bed a happy man that night because I got it working. So anyway, that's quite a story. I mean, that was totally unexpected. But you've all done that. You've gone on and run a test on 10 meters when you think the band is dead, and somebody from California answers you. So the first Gold Dust twins faded away. I think at that time we moved to Ohio from Central Illinois, and there just wasn't any place to put them. So later on, the second Gold Dust twins appeared. Now I kind of realize how lucky I've been with this. These have happened in successive trades. The fact that you can even find one that many times is really very fortunate. So my second set was about 1985 or so, part of a large radio trade, and required a kind of a different focus to get running. At that time, the radios are about 25 years old. They're no longer 15 years old. They're actually getting old. Now, I wasn't old when I was 25, but the radios are, okay? There was only 175 A4. I aligned it, and I did that really to become more familiar with the radio. There wasn't anything wrong with it. It sounded really good, had all the filters in it. I physically replaced a working but damaged audio amplifier tube. It was intermittent. Took it out and it was missing a pin. Well, it's simply a 68Q5. And still to this day, you can take a 68Q5 and throw it away without feeling bad about it. Old gear, somebody mentioned this tonight. You can still repair old gear. You can buy something made in 1935 and get the parts you need to fix it. If you have a Yaesu that's 2 years old or a Kenworth or an ICOM, you're dead. I did replace all the electrolytic capacitors for good measure. I don't do that anymore. I make sure they're bad first. There are symptoms of bad capacitors. Are they swollen? Or they look like they've outgassed or something's come out of the end of them even though they show good capacitance? It's also easy today to buy a $10 device to measure capacitance. Couldn't do that in these days. The KWS-1 transmitter was a different story. But one thing I've learned over time, small tip I say, long years of doing this, I've learned that once you find the transmitter or the receiver is safe, by that I mean that you're not going to blow up the power transformer by shorting out the power capacitor or the filter capacitors, I leave the radios on for days. Now, one thing you want to be careful of, and I've got the little note down there, I never leave vintage radios on unless I'm in the room. I just don't. When I say I leave them on for days, I shut them off when I go to bed at night, I shut them off when I leave the basement. So that has to be kind of successive there. Believe it or not, I have radios that appear to be out of alignment no matter what I've done. I let them run for a few days and they're like gold. The audio smooths out, a lot of things like that. Is it scientific? No. Or I say, well, maybe. Effective? Definitely. I replaced several electrolytic capacitors that were marginal, not necessarily failed. Here again, these were swollen. Classic example of a defective electrolytic. If you see an electrolytic that's swollen, I don't care how well it's working, you take it out and replace it. I repaired as best I could. Now I'm gonna, if you bear with me a minute, I want to show you what I'm talking about here. You see here on the front of these transmitters, the two knobs right here, those are vernier control knobs, and one controls loading and one controls tuning. In effect, the transmitter is capable of running from 3.5 to 30 megahertz. It doesn't have the other tuned circuits to do that. Those are vernier controls. All of you have seen those. You see a vernier even on something like a gear reduction on a dial. These apparently, well, let's go back. I should have put that picture back out here, but I didn't do it. These apparently, it looked like the transmitter must have been dropped on its face. Now, I bring that up only because think about the ones I got out of the dumpster. They were completely undamaged. Here are these, I don't know what had happened to them. There was no other apparent damage. I don't know whether somebody, I mean, goofy stuff happens. Like, did somebody find they were jammed and hit them with a hammer or something like that? You have to be very careful with things like pot metal. Pot metal becomes more and more brittle.
You know what happened?
What?
You put something like that in the back of a pickup truck, and you hit the brakes too quick,
Oh,
and that thing goes
good point.
bam.
That's another lesson.
Personal
When
experience.
when you carry an old radio, you fix it so there is no way the front can hit unless you get hit in the side. Somebody T-bones you, that's different. There's plenty of blankets, and you've learned that too. I had to learn the hard way too. But you're right, never thought about that. The second Gold Dust Twins also faded into history. And I have to tell you, because of where I was at the time, I never put them on the air. I ran them on a dummy load. I listened with the 75A4, but never transmitted with the KWS-1. So they disappeared. And the third one appears. Now this is probably one of the biggest trades and acquisitions. I think the only thing I really bought here was the 30L1 at the bottom. I had this massive trade that I went through. And in the end, I got one Collins 75A4, one KWS-1, then there's several S-lines, a KWM2, spare Collins power supplies, a transmitter that I still have that's a winged emblem 32S3. If you can believe, this thing is absolutely perfect, except somebody put an extra hole in the front panel. It's like, people ought to go to jail for that, but they don't. I honestly think what the guy was trying to do, or gal, on later KWM2s, there's a dial lock, and that's exactly where he had this hole. And I wonder if he was trying to retrofit that. I have no idea. The 75A4 was essentially a working radio. I went through Collins Collectors Association, and any of you are familiar with that, they have a recommended replacement parts list for the 75A4 and the KWS-1. I did that. I did an alignment. Then I ran it for a long time. I was on the vintage sideband net with it many times with that receiver and that transmitter, or HD44. The HD44 really goes with an SX117 that I have. And then the 75A4 also, it's destined to be paired up not only with the KWS-1, but with a Johnson Valiant. Now that was my first transmitter, not that one, but a Valiant. It also was yours?
Yeah.
You had one of
Well,
those.
I just got one of them.
Pardon?
I just got one. I
Did
had
you?
it on the air Saturday.
Well, good man. They're a great radio. You know what I like best about them?
You know what I don't like about them?
What?
The transmission on the bottom to get it to change the
Oh,
band.
that is,
I mean, you gotta get a pipe wrench underneath there sometimes to get the turn.
I like the H66As.
What's that?
The H66A Mercury
Oh, yeah.
rectifiers.
Beautiful purple blue. You
Yep,
sit there
and they
talking.
flash when you're on,
boom, 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 boom.
yep, that's great.
Awesome
You're
stuff.
a good man, you know that?
Yeah. Hey, I got it paired up with a 51J.
Yep, there you go.
I got a Maritime 51J with a matching 180S.
Can you take over the program? I gotta talk to Dave. We gotta talk after this.
Yeah.
Okay? You need to go to pizza tonight.
I got my wife's waiting for me, but I got a 75A1 and a 32B1, and then I've also got a 51J3 R388. I've got two 270Gs. I've got the other big 270. I got the matching 180S for the 32B1.
So do we need to do some co-visiting of shacks?
Yeah.
I think we need to visit each other, seriously.
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, can we get your wife to come out with us?
No, she can't walk. Her knees are wiped out.
Oh,
Otherwise, next time.
okay.
So this 75A4 that I have now obviously was not used by a CW operator. I have the filter to replace one of those two phone filters, but it holds three filters. The ones I have, the 6 kilohertz and the 2.7 came with it, and the 2.1 had been thrown in there sometime for narrow sideband. They're good choices for sideband and AM, but they're lacking for CW. Those filters were mechanical filters, but they don't have the skirt selectivity of today's mechanical filters. So even a 500 hertz, I think there's a 300 you can get for it now, which would probably be a better choice. So anyway, 75A4 is not the one originally purchased for the KWS-1 transmitter that I have. They were purchased together, the two, but the 75A4 is about 2 years newer. So I'm making an assumption that somehow this guy got a later receiver. The transmitter, it's about 3/4 of the way through the entire build schedule.
When you talked about the 75A4 filters,
Yeah,
I think PQ has got two.
that's where I got the one. I got the 500 hertz.
He's got like a whole
Yeah, that-
aftermarket set of those.
That Curry,
Yeah,
something like, yeah. That's the one, that's where I got him.
okay.
I get a lot of stuff from him.
Yeah,
So
Mark is a
He's
pretty.
a good guy, and he's a fair guy, too.
Yeah, he is.
Okay, just to give you an idea, the KWS-1 turned out to be quite a challenge. And a lot of it had nothing to do with bad components or anything like that. It was build quality, if you can believe that. As a Collins collector, I hate to say that. But look at this tube socket here. Let me go up here and kind of point out where. These were dual triode tubes used in the regulator circuit. And I believe there's four tubes like this in the transmitter. So you can see that they were paralleling the two triode elements in the tubes, okay? You can see that. You think of the schematic. Well, there's the 3 parallels right there, okay? All right, now think about this. You see, this is a bare wire. This is insulated. This is insulated. What we found in looking at this, I had some help from some other Collins Collector Association members, is that over time it gets so hot in there, these melted, and there was enough pressure, they were pushed down enough. Now, was that Collins, or was somebody working on the radio sometime in its life? Did they do that? But this was on all 4 of these tubes. These were shorting out. Well, you would get full voltage, unregulated voltage. Thank goodness we didn't ruin anything in the transmitter, but that turned out to be the problem. Now, found all kinds of things like that. That's just the most dramatic one. So it took a long time to find that stuff. I won't go through all this. This kind of details what pin numbers were involved. There's a couple of other things you can see here. So these were actual shorts. This particular picture is a 6AS7 dual triode. I wanted to show you here too. These were old paper capacitors. Those of you that collect radios know that paper capacitors are bad. Non-paper capacitors are good. Doesn't mean every one of them you ever find is bad, but you're better off just to get them out of there. But you can see this blob of solder right here? It's best not to go back to the tube socket and wrench that out of there, because these sockets become brittle. So there was a device back in the 60s made by Sprague, and it was a spring, little tiny spring, that had an ID of about 2 capacitor leads, and it was coated with solder. And you would cut the wires, you would slip the 2 leads in there, and then you would heat that up and it would solder the link. Now, a purist is going to say, oh, you got that glob of solder there, but you haven't damaged the socket in the process. Now, I kind of tend to be the kind of collector that's into the idea, I don't make things sloppy, but I do things that make the radio work. Nobody's going to see that once it's back together. I don't mind if the capacitors are orange instead of black. You know, there's a company that makes these capacitors in black just for guys like me, and they're round that look like a paper capacitor. I don't go into that. They're expensive too. So anyway, the KWS-1 continued. The cooling fan was fitted with new bearings. Now that fan is as quiet as the one in my L7 linear amplifier, which makes almost no noise. The transmitter was aligned and fitted with new finals. That particular transmitter had 4X150s in it. Later KWS-1s had 4 CX250s. That wasn't because of the capacity or the cooling capacity. It was because IMAC quit making the 4X150, so Collins had to do something. So they made the change. Remember, this radio had an input of 1,000 watts, so at continuous commercial power it had to dissipate about 500, but that's intermittent. So the 150 was okay. It lasted fine. I changed it because in all those parts from the first one, I had 3 or 4 sets of 4CX250Bs, so I changed them out. There were nagging intermittent problems. I still had trouble with the radio. I turned it on, it wouldn't work. Turned it on again, it worked fine. That's when I had a visit from a couple of guys who were in Collins Collectors who were here at Rockwell Collins, and they knew about me. So they came over and visited, and they had some ideas in the tank circuit, which I never would have spotted, just experience. And the transmitter after that was much more dependable. So I did go back and up to the top. I did follow the must-replace component list early on, but these guys really made the difference. Another small tip, when working on an old radio, always look for parts that smoke, on fire, or seem oddly black or iridescent blue. That's a good lesson. And today, the third Gold Dust Twins, the 7580, the one we just talked about, they're in operation on a regular basis. Now, not all, I told you that it was early this year that I operated, or late last year that I operated them the last time. The receiver and transmitter together. I operate the receiver a lot. So the 7584, the comment I'll make, Dave, I don't know how you concur with that, but I find it's competitive today. Now, does it have things like noise reduction, which is pretty handy on today's crowded vans? Does it have a continuously variable bandwidth? No. However, it does a lot of things very well. And if you learn, in its 1950s, they called it AVC. We call it AGC today. Its AVC circuit couldn't quite handle super strong signals. Radios today can. So you had to learn the term ride the RF gain. All of you know what you mean by that? What we mean? So you had to do that. You don't have to do it so much in today's radios, although I think I do. So I had a great solid front end, beautiful on AM, better than some of today's radios, and I like that.
Yeah, you know, it's a difference. It's like a truly good tube audio compared to a flat.
Nobody understands that today, but I do. I know what you mean.
I prefer, I mean.
Yep. Yep. It just sounds good.
Shit, my basement weighs more than my basement.
Right.
I got a BC 610, remember?
Oh, there you go. Now, I had a friend with one of those when I was first in the radio. The KWS one is a powerful, good, clean signal, 500 or 600 watts. It won't work on the work bands. The final would, but the transmitter itself will not. Time-consuming to tune. At the time, that's not Collins' trait. At the time, every radio, you went through the grid, you're doing all these processes. It could be like 25 or 30 steps. The only company that figured that out in the 1950s was Hallicrafters. You peaked the drive and you peaked the final and you were on the air. Just that fast. And then Hallicrafters went away from it. But the one thing that it did do, the KWS one will tune, what do you think, a couple hundred ohms of impedance, 4 to 1, 5 to 1 SWR. The Hallicrafters was 50 to 75 ohms, period. Just like today's radios. But the radio stumbles, and there's times when, kind of a joke with a bunch of Collins collectors I know, is that right before he died, Art Collins took all the grid drive out of the company and he put it in the safe and never told anybody the combination. Because invariably, Collins radios have a grid drive problem. I don't know what it is. I guess that's what you get for paying twice as much as the other brands. So, one of the big things with the Collins transmitter, the KWS-1, how many of you have a linear amplifier? Okay, and you use it, and it's got like 3,000 volts on the plate. 1,500, 3,000 volts. Where's the fuse? In the primary. Not in the Collins. It's in, I think that's around 1,500 volts, because the tubes don't take as much voltage. They have a 2,000 volt fuse in the primary, on the hot side of the primary. Well, I think currently those are about $35. If you can find them. I think I have 5 or 6 of them. And a lot of the guys will tell you to budget 5 or 6, just to, or they say 5 or 10, just to get through the restoration process. I was more fortunate than that. That's $300. So to the end, love them or hate them, the Gold Dust Twins have what I call desk presence. You walk into a station with one of those, you want to look at that thing, touch it, you want to see how it works, and bragging rights. But if you want one, be really careful what you ask for, because you might get one. Now, here's some things about the Gold Dust Twins you might not know. On the 7584, Original 75A4s, you see the arc on the S meter on the left-hand one? See how you got the red above S9? That went away on the later ones. The one I have looks like the one on the right. The limiting, or the noise limiter lettering, you see it up here, these two knobs? Now, I don't know how, maybe this is minor stuff, but it fascinates me. Later receivers, they're on the same line.
Bill,
Yes,
you know, for car aficionados, they look at the originality of it for the resale value.
right?
Does that work the same with the radio?
Oh, yeah, definitely. With any radio? What, you mean the radio
So if
itself?
somebody found a gold dust radio for sale, would they look for things like what you're pointing out?
Yeah, that's more of a hint of how old it is. But you can tell that from the serial number.
Yeah.
Yeah, people look for that. The ones with these modifications tend to be in the first few hundred. Collins settled on how they made them very early. There's a couple of exceptions to that. But for the most part, most of the changes I'm going to show you were after the first few hundred units. Well, then you can find guys that say, oh, well, I want one of those unmodified ones. I want one of those original ones, because they don't operate any different, really. Okay, the main tuning dial. Those of you that know about this equipment know about the fact that, you see the dial here? This was the original. But what it came down to, Collins had been making this stuff for AM for years. Well, AM signals are real broad, so when you tune that knob across there, the fine tuning doesn't have to be too pronounced. You get a 2-to-1 ratio on that knob, you can tune across there and you'll be fine. Well, they discovered that was a problem, so they introduced and made a retrofit kit for a 4-to-1 vernier. And you see the difference? You can spot these because the knob is so big, because in order to get the gears, they had to actually make a little framework and drop the knob down. If you look at the knob, you see here, it's up in, almost in the open area of the dial reticule, okay? If you go over here, look at it's completely below it. But this is bigger around, so it almost covers up, it actually does, the lettering on these two knobs. That's easier to see on a later picture. Okay, now let's do the KWS-1. This is easier to see. This is the same thing. The KWS-1 also changed it. See how it almost covers those up? Well, the KWS-1, very early radios had a way to adjust the ALC attack. Nobody really used that. So what they did later is they changed that to a 2-position on-off switch. It was a key closure. If you wanted to test a key down, you turned that switch. Very early radios have an ALC adjust there. The other thing, there were different things inside. They changed some tubes. Final amplifiers, as I mentioned before, were changed from 4X150s to 4CX250Bs. There were minor circuit changes to accommodate those tubes. Even though we today just unplug one and plug in the other, actually there's some circuit differences. Mostly are ignored. There were a lot of modifications on KWS-1s, because even at 15 or 1600 volts, they would flash over inside. The voltage was too high in damp environments. If you have it in a dehumidified basement or upstairs in a house, fine. At that time, there were ham stations in barns, so I mean, there was a lot of that, where the environment would be very damp. At that time, early on, and Collins claims none of these ever got out of the factory, you see this is the front of the power supply. They used to have louvers here. And I think that was to let dampness out, let some air circulation. But it also affected the operation of the cooling system. It let too much air in. I think they tried to control that, so too much is a problem. Now, I've got some pictures here that we can go through them real quickly. These are out of the manual. I thought you might find them interesting. There's just a picture of the front of the receiver, picture of the back of the receiver, typical terminals. By the way, they had N connectors. They didn't use SO239s. Inside the receiver.
I got a question. Did you solid state all the rectifiers and the...
No. And here's the reason I didn't. Because we've moved from 110 volts to 120. You've heard this story, I'm sure, but those of you that haven't. When these radios were made, AC voltage on the wall socket was 120 volts. 110 volts, sorry. It's 125 or more now, or 120 at least. Well, think about that. You're multiplying that in a high voltage circuit, so all of a sudden your high voltage is 10% higher. The filter capacitors don't have that much headroom in them. So no, I haven't done it. And I know guys that have, and it's not bothering. So anyway, I didn't finish, I guess, really. You not only increase the voltage by changing to the solid state rectifiers, you increase it by plugging it in. Now, a lot of hams use auto transformers, things like that. It's pretty tough to do with our 220 volt circuits that have a common. But no, I don't. Short answer.
And the reason is because the power transformers are so hard to find. And if you don't,
Oh, I know, you're right.
if you don't, and you're not careful, it goes back to leaving the room.
Yep.
I'll give you a perfect example. I've got a pretty moderate collection of helicopter stuff, and about 2 months ago, I'm sitting there and I've got my 32V1 sitting there, or HT32 sitting there, and I'm listening to one of the nets at my neck,
Yeah.
whatever. And I go upstairs, and all of a sudden I can smell this pungent odor, choke. And I go downstairs and I can't for the life of me figure out where the hell that's coming from. And I had forgot I had turned the radio on, never turned it off.
Well, I've got a friend that was flying the plane.
Yeah.
He and I grew up together. We collect together. We transfer equipment back and forth all the time. He operates all of his boat anchors. He doesn't have any amplifiers.
Right.
He operates every one of his boat anchors off of Variac, and he runs them at 110 volts. Probably that's a smart idea.
Yep.
Bottom of the receiver. I'll tell you one thing here. This
They put nitrogen in that VFO?
Pardon?
Do they put nitrogen in that VFO? I don't call it a VFO.
They
call it-
did in the beginning.
Yeah, they did in the 390s and the 390A.
All those, that's a sealed canister VFO. Let's go.
Right
You can
there.
see this can right here. How many of you have ever used on high frequency something called passband tuning? Okay, you have, all right. I bet you ever, or IF shift? Okay, that's a way to shift the filters, sometimes two filters around each other, but in essence, on an old receiver, it's turning the tuning dial one direction and the BFO the other. That's exactly what you're doing on these old radios. Well, there was no way to do that electronically then, simply. So Collins did it different. You've got the IF shift control. Oh, that's the transmitter, sorry about that. Right here, IF shift, and you would turn this dial. If you looked in there, there was a belt drive that turned the VFO on its axis slightly, left the knob the same, and then moved the BFO to get your sideband signal the other direction. It was just really ingenious what they did. I don't think a lot of people even realize
Yeah,
that.
they stretched it out.
Yep. Okay, there's the front of the transmitter. This one, as you can see, is a later version, because that's a test key, okay? Top here, the two tubes are right in here. This slides over after you loosen the bolts and pull it off, and that's the tank circuit. Bottom view, there's that VFO again. Now, you can't see a very good picture here, but there's a neck back there and a little elbow, and you blow the air, and this elbow will swivel. There's a hose that goes between the two units. It blows air in here out of the base of the power supply. And you can just see the frame of the blower in there. There's the front of the power supply. That door I showed you, there's a little key lock. You pull that down, that's what you see. There's the power transformer, and there's that reactor we talked about. Huge. The one I have has a Peter W. Doll transformer in it. I don't know why. One of the reasons is that either somebody burned out the power transformer at one time, or the Peter W. Doll has about 25% more capacity. That's another reason to do it. It's no heavier because it's more modern steel. Now, what's going on right now with it? Well, there's three of us right now. There's four when I wrote this. In the Collins collectors working on a retrofit receiver transmitter interconnect. If you ever saw the cabling that Collins supplied to go between the two of this, it's just an absolute rat's nest. And listen, it came in 1957, 55, 56. It's just getting old. So we're working on a way to do this with a little kit. Now understand, the total volume of kits we could potentially ever sell would be probably on the order of 300 or 400. That's just all there is left. so not everybody's gonna buy one. The current value of a complete setup, and we were talking about that a little earlier, is maybe $4,500. You can see them for $10,000, you can see them for $2,500. I saw one on, I think pth.swap.com, and I think that guy was gonna take it to date and he wanted $2,500 or $2,600, but it hadn't been turned on in many, many, many years.
Bill, how much did they sell for in 1955?
You know, I don't know, I have that at the beginning, $500 or $600 or $1,200 maybe for the transmitter.
That's about the price of a car back then.
Oh, I know, they were very, very expensive, that's why they didn't sell very many. I have two matching speakers, both of them rusted within an inch of their life. I don't know that they'll ever be restored. I haven't worked on them for a long time, and you notice I use that Bell & Howell speaker with mine. It certainly sounds better than the rusted Hope that leaks air all over the place.
Which one of those two speakers do you have?
I have both of those.
You have the one with the light?
No. That's an internet picture, so it'd be something you could see. I do not have the light or the screen.
But you have the case? Mark's got all of the stuff to fix that.
Well, I know, but he wants a lot of money.
Well, yeah, he does. He's
Yes,
pretty
I
proud
do.
of that shit. There ain't no
Oh, I
doubt
know.
about that.
Well, he's gonna get it. I wouldn't sell it for any less.
Oh, yeah, I agree. He's got the market in the North America, I think, on just about all that Collins crap.
You know, my Drake stuff, my Hallicrafter stuff, my Hammerlin stuff, I get all my parts from him. It's just amazing.
Have you seen that speaker that's got the light on the top of it?
Right.
They make a setup like that that's got all of the antenna rotator control in
Yeah,
it.
he
It's got an
has one of those, doesn't he?
Want me with that?
Doesn't he have one of
He's
those?
got one of those also. That went with that KWS-1.
Now, that was a device that, I think it ran a prop pitch motor, didn't it?
Yep.
That's what people used to use to turn their rotors with, turn their antennas with.
Yep.
Okay, that's it. So I just want to say thanks for letting the 1950s live again. And anybody got any comments or questions or anything?
You mentioned those sockets are brittle. Can you still buy those?
Yes.
The tube sockets?
You know, you could get them, and you could actually buy ceramic versions of them too, which would be better. Me.
Isn't there several different nets on the HF bands that are associated with the Collins collectors?
Collins Collectors has two nets every week that I know of.
Right.
One's a technical net, one's a check-in net. Go on the internet if you're interested and look up Collins Collectors, plural, Association. It shows the nets. And what's the other association?
There's a Collins collector's net on 3880 on the first Wednesday of the month, because it conflicts with Mike NEDCR's DX60 net, or not the DX60 net, but the multi-IMAC net that he runs.
Okay.
And it's the first Wednesday of the